This is February 18th, 2011. My name is Joe Bruckner. I'm a volunteer at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm with Tony Hilliard, who is also a volunteer at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, and we are honored today to have with us Tom Owens. Tom Owens is a Vietnam veteran who lives in Atlanta and has kindly agreed to come in and tell us his story so that it can be part of the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. And Tom, we want to thank you very much for coming in and allowing us to hear your story and
you're welcome.
put it on record.
I'm honored to be here.
Would you give us your full name and current address, please?
My name is Thomas Mitchell Owens.
Okay. And what is your date of birth?
May 6, 1952.
Okay. Mr. Owens, tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
I was born in South Carolina, May 6, 1952, in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and lived there till I was 8 years old and moved here to Georgia. And I was the second child out of 4 children. And I had a good childhood. I didn't own a pair of shoes until I moved to Georgia. I was so poor. And I grew up in a very kind of dysfunctional family. And some people are fortunate enough to have good families, and I was not fortunate enough. And as soon as I was old enough, I joined the Army. I had a severe brain concussion when I was 12 years old, overcome a lot of physical obstacles from that. And I joined the Army when I was 17 just to get out of the environment and not be in a dysfunctional family where my brothers hated me. My mother liked me, my father, but my brothers didn't, and they still hate me to this day.
So that was around 1969, I guess, when you joined the service?
As soon as I was 17 years old.
Okay.
And my mother signed for me, my father signed for me, and my brothers kind of laughed and made fun of me for going. They did not choose to serve in Vietnam. You made choices back then. Either you served or you didn't serve or made a contribution, and they chose not to. In fact, my oldest brother, he joined the Army after he knew he was not going to get drafted and go to Vietnam.
Oh, really?
So he was a classical draft dodger in a certain sense of the word.
Well, 1969 was Vietnam had really heated up. Tell us what you, just as an individual, knew about Vietnam as you went in. And what would be going on over there if you went to Vietnam?
Well, I was just 17 years old when I joined, and they would not send you to Vietnam until you became 18 years old. And I went through basic training at Fort Benning in July 1969, the same month that we landed on the moon. So I always remember the month that I joined the Army is the same year and time that we landed on the moon. I went through basic training at Fort Benning, very hot. The answer was no to everything, and I survived and graduated, then went to Fort Jackson for AIT, and then they sent me to Presidio in San Francisco until I turned 18 years old. Okay. And was doing some administrative clerical work until I was old enough to go. I volunteered to go to Vietnam. They didn't send me, and it's amazing how some people to this day and back then say, why do you want to go? Why do you go? I mean, I have countrymen and friends that are over there sacrificing for me, and I just want to be there beside them, and that's what I did. And right before I went to Vietnam, I went on sick call and told the doctor I wasn't feeling good, and they said, well, there's nothing wrong with you, just go on back to the barracks. And during that time, people think you were a slacker getting out of duty. Well, my appendix ruptured on me after the doctor sent me back to the barracks. I had a ruptured appendix, spent a month in the hospital, a month on convalescent leave, and then I went to Vietnam. And I arrived there October the 5th, 1971. I flew out of Oakland Army Air Base, and we landed in Hawaii, Wake Island. I flew on I had pictures of it, United Airlines. And flew into Benoit, and we had a big layover in Okinawa because they're having some type of a rocket attack, and the civilian plane could not land or go in to Vietnam. And then I remember other veterans would tell you as soon as you got off the plane, it was very nauseating. You know, there was something in the air, gunpowder, and just it's very. They put us all on buses that had meshes on the side of the bus to keep people from throwing hand grenades into the bus while they drove you to the Long Bean replacement station. And then after spending a couple of months, a couple of days there, they manifested me to Quang Tri. I got on the C-130 and some other soldiers, and we flew all the way to Quang Tri and landed at night. Being 18 years old, and it's as far as north as you could go. And then went to replacement battalion there for the 5th Mech. I went to Vietnam as a replacement. I did not go as a regular unit where they trained up and went. And then after a couple of days at replacement battalion, I was assigned to Headquarters Company 1st Battalion, 61st Infantry, 5th Infantry Division. And their base camp was in Quang Tri, but the area of operation that we served at was at it was called Leatherneck Square by the Marines, and it's at Firebase Charlie 2 in Con Tien and Camelot Village, and we were considered the northernmost infantry battalion in South Vietnam, and you couldn't get any further north than that. And I lived in a bunker at Con Tien and Charlie 2, and you did not walk around or linger around on the fire bases because the MVA and the VC would shoot at you. You had to wear a steel pot and a flight jacket, and you run from, you know, make haste from one bunker position to another. And toward the end of our tour of duty up there, the rockets were so bad and so many were coming in that we had to dig foxholes around the helipad, the mess hall areas, or even where you went to use the latrine. It was just, you didn't have time to get somewhere. You had to be there. And I arrived, it was the beginning of the monsoons in October, and I didn't see it, the sunshine about February or March. I was wet. There's no sense in getting clean clothes, you just wanted dry clothes. And when I first got there, I worked in the Tactical Operations Center. I worked for Sergeant Moore, which is since has become a very good friend of mine, and I worked in there for about a month, and he said, Owens, you need to be out in the field shooting instead of being in here in this talk. So he put me out in the field and survived, and what they trained me to do, I was in the ground surveillance of infantry battalion. They had you had the recon, and then you had the scout section had the ground surveillance. We had special night vision goggles and devices and radar stuff that we would carry, or either the choppers to the field, and we would be embedded with the infantry to look for and make contact with the MVA and the VC. The purpose of our mission there was to slow down or keep the MVA from infiltrating across the DMZ into South Vietnam. And it was a very dangerous place. You couldn't be complacent, and I think because of my time in the Boy Scouts and living in the woods, I kind of learned to adapt. And during that period of time, to survive in such harsh conditions, instead of complaining about it, you just learn to love it and enjoy it, and say, couldn't be happier than being a grunt in the woods.
Now this was the 1970, 71 period, is that correct?
I stayed, I got there October, and our unit, our battalion, we were the last American combat unit to be pulled off the DMZ. We left in July '71. And during that period of time, if you had any more time left on your tour, they reassigned you to another unit in Vietnam, and they were going to get 365 days out of you. You didn't go. Some people got to go home, but I had enough 90 days left on my tour. They sent me down to the Americal Division, Company B, 3rd and 1st Infantry. I was at Hill 411.
Would you describe some of the missions that you went on It's part
Well,
of your.
my missions and our sections, we had a kind of like a round robin section. We had probably about 25 people, and some of us would go to Contian, some of us stay at Charlie 2, and some of us would go down to Cam Lo or Dong Ha, and we would work just 2 or 3 man team. We have a radio and a weapon, and if we wasn't doing radar, we'd go out and do ambushes at night, just 2 or 3 of us, and outside the wire, and put up Claymore and listen and do stuff and give us a radio. We're kind of like an early warning device. And there was some areas I was real scared to be at, and some wasn't. There was a river between Contian and Charlie 2 called the Charlie 2 Bridge, and it was just something about that place had an eerie feeling. And since that time, I knew why there's a lot of eerie feeling. A year or 2 before, a lot of Marines were killed in that area, and I kind of sensed that there was and I feel very honored to have served with the 5th Mech in Vietnam, and reading about it, looking about it. I've slept on the ground where many Marines died in the Battle of Contian and Cam Lo, and they fought for that real estate, and I feel like I was carrying on their tradition. And
Did you have frequent contact with the enemy?
oh, it was on a daily basis. We were more, during that period of time, it was more of a retrograde operations. We just had more defensive positions, and we engaged the enemy, but not on a full scale that they did years before. On some days, we would get anywhere between 100 to several hundred rockets a day on a fire basis, big as 2 or 3 football fields. It's very either inside the wire or outside the wire, and they were very consistent. They were put a rocket on you at breakfast in the morning to wake you up, at lunchtime, and in the evening time. And we had they would have mortars. They were mortarists, and okay, and but I know when people come to visit us up there at Charlie 2, they didn't stay very long, because after 1 or 2 rockets come in, they wanted to leave. And I was told, so this is what we live through every day. And the food was terrible. We go in during the monsoons, it'd be 6 inches of mud in the mess hall, and just terrible food. So I learned to eat C rations and lose a lot of weight.
What was the morale like?
I think morale, when I was there, the morale, we had race problems, had drug problems, and a lot of, the morale, was kind of bad. I think a lot of the people, we were out there in the field and we were not getting the proper supplies that we needed, clothing and food. And when we go to the rear, we see the people in the rear having stuff that we needed to have. And to this day, people I serve with, we kind of remember how we didn't get the proper logistic supplies of food and clothing and stuff that we should have had. And the people on the front line doing the fighting and need the stuff more than the people in the rear. Yeah. You could always tell up there the new people from the people that lived there or worked in the area was the type of uniform. See, the people from the rear would come up with spit shine boots and nice uniforms with a clipboard and a coffee cup in their hand, and asking questions, and we just kind of laughed at them and shunned. And but it's not about how you look; it's how you're going to fight. Yeah. You're going to hold your ground. And it was toward the end of my tour there, Firebase Fuller was overrun, and we had they were preparing for the Easter invasion in March of '72, and we were outnumbered there. If it wasn't for the B52 Strikes and the artillery, that it'd have been a lot worse than it could have been.
Well, I've noticed that you were the recipient of 2 Bronze Stars. Yeah. I want to congratulate you, yeah. Number 1, and number 2, could you tell us a little bit about
Well, I don't know what I got them for. I've just, the real people that deserve the medals are on the wall that didn't come back, and I'm just proud and thankful that I stood tall in a place of hell and doing a job that a lot of people didn't want to do and wouldn't do. And it was, I don't know what, they claim I just was doing my job, and it was I just very, that's not significant about getting Bronze Stars. I just want to be known that I was there doing a job alongside my fellow countrymen and came back home. And medals don't mean much to me. It's just the recognition that your fellow veterans give to you. Say, you were there with us, and you were there for me, and that's all that matters to me than any medals or any recognition. And I'm a member of the Society of the 5th that honors the deeds of the 5th Division. The Society of the 5th, the Red Diamond, served in World War I, World War II, in Vietnam, and we were called Patton's Red Devils. And keeping on the tradition, George Patton would be very proud of the 5th Mech for the service they did on the DMZ.
From the time you arrived at your assignment to the time you left, what difference did you notice in enemy activity or morale of the troops or just the whole situation over that 12-month period?
Well, I think the people in the rear knew more what was going on in the real world than what we did. We were just concerned about staying alive on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. We didn't have cell phones, internet, or anything like that. You just wrote a letter, but I think the people from the rear came up to the fire bases thinking the war was over with and were going home, and they had a very complacent attitude. Yeah. And I was very surprised that senior leadership in Vietnam would have that kind of attitude, and you come up to the fire base, and I said, we tried to tell them, say, look, the war's still going on and they're going to kill you. You can't come up here swaggering around like it's over with. In fact, after we stood down from the fire base, and with all the confusion, everybody packing up and going home, everybody put the leadership decided to put all the weapons in pack them up and put grease on them, and just, I don't know whatever they're going to do with them, but in their great scheme of things, we got overrun in Quang Tri, and we were over there getting their weapons out that they told us that we should give up. So my lesson learned, as long as you're in a war theater in Vietnam, till you get on that freedom bird, the threat is there, and they will try to kill you and try to, you can't be complacent.
When you left, were you relieved by another unit? Or
when I left, the Owens took over the fire bases up there. Okay. The Owens came, and after everybody left, I went back up to the fire bases after everybody had been pulled off, and just the Owens was up there. I had to go up there to get something. I don't know what it was, but I always remember it was very quiet, very eerie feeling, and I said, it's time to leave. I'm ready to get out of there. And but where I was, the fire bases, one I mentioned, they had to call the McNamara line. They put the minefields across the DMZ there, and they disbanded that. But it's been written at the time that was the most dangerous spot on the face of the earth, most heavily minefield on the face of the earth at that time. And to this day, as we speak, they're still discovering mines there. They're very heavily mined field. And while we were there, the North Vietnamese would buzz our fire base with a MiG. And we were, whether our government won't admit it or not, we were fighting the Russians and the Chinese there too. And they had Russian helicopters. You could always tell when activity was going to pick up is when we could sit there and watch the Russian helicopters fly over into the mountains, and then we would have get a lot of incoming the next day or so. And But I was able to witness a part of history just to sit back, and is when we had the invasion into Laos, and called Dewey Cannon. And I saw the 101st that come up there, and some units of the Americal, and they had the insurgent into Laos and the big build up for that.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Well, it was, there's some different opinions about it. Some say it was a success and not a success, and we Americans did go into Laos even though we weren't supposed to. Americans did go into North Vietnam even though we weren't supposed to. But it was just a big build-up to try to hope. The Americans knew that, that there was going to be an invasion, but they didn't know it was going to be as bad as it was going to be. And while we were leaving in July, you could sit there at the naked eye and see the NVA bulldozing the highways across the DMZ to bring the equipment down for the Eastern invasion. But the people in Saigon and the people behind the desk didn't believe us. And there was some stories about sometimes we would shoot, they had the NVA training camp with a flag over there, and we would shoot at them a few times, and they would complain to the news media, and the news media would complain up through the chain of command, don't shoot at them. It's kind of fun. But
that makes it sort of tough to fight a war, doesn't it?
oh yeah, and it's but getting back to the Lamson, it happened right at the end of the monsoon season in Quang Tri and Dong Ha. They had nothing but a lot of helicopters and logistics supplies going into Route 9 into Khe Sanh, and parts of my unit heavily supported that operation. Some of us stayed put there and led the next square because they didn't know if they had to push into Laos that the NVA would launch a rear flanking attack across the DMZ and hit us. And it was a lot of sacrifices by a lot of Americans, you know, a lot of sorties, helicopters and stuff were flown into that area. And but I kind of enjoyed sometimes, you know, in Vietnam it was safer to be out in the field than it was on a fire base. You had your chances of survival were a lot better.
Explain that.
Well, when you're on a fire base, they were looking at you.
Yep.
And there's one rule of thumb that the veterans taught us and we passed along. If you don't see them, they're still there and they know you're there and they're going to get you if you're not careful. Yeah. And, you know, I felt safer out in the field. I felt very uncomfortable when we went to the rear and when they asked you to turn in your weapons.
You mentioned B52 strikes. Were you able to witness B52 strikes?
Oh yeah, that's the best
Describe
feeling
it.
in the morning. We are alive today because of B52 strikes, and 5 o'clock in the morning. When they had overran Firebase Fuller, they had to call in a lot of B52 strikes, and that's the greatest feeling in the world. And you know that they were getting too close. And I think today they need to use more of that in a war on terrorism, use a little bit more B-52 strikes. And I think the use of B-52 strikes is you want to save your man's life. You don't want to get hurt, and you don't want to, you know, don't go in there, engage them, and talk to them. Just get rid of them. But there was extremely a lot of activity going on all the time. A lot of mines, and they just literally put mines everywhere. I've learned in Vietnam to never pick anything up, no matter how nice it looked. You religiously, and to this day, young soldiers, they laugh and mock at you and don't think that's true, but it is true. You do not pick anything up, and always watch where you're going. And I ask myself sometimes why I'm still alive. You know, there's other people that was not as fortunate as I was, but you got to have that survivor instinct that, you know, that I'm going to survive and look death and fear straight in the eye, and if it happens, it happens. And I think it's just a matter of luck and being aware of your surroundings and being around with the right people in order to survive.
When did you leave Vietnam?
I left, I went to the Americal Division. They were standing down like the 5th Met was, and I operated around Hill 411. And my last month there, I came down with a real bad case of cellulitis. And I spent a month in the hospital at Chu Lai, and they wanted to medevac me out. I have scars on my arm where they took skin off my arm and put it between my finger. I have my whole arm swelled up to my shoulder, extremely real bad cellulitis, and I was in the Chu Lai hospital for a month. I had 4 shots a day in the IV, and very lucky I didn't lose my arm. I guess being in the field, not having any hot meals, and in shower sanitary conditions. And, but I went from the DMZ in a different environment to a jungle environment, and I prefer the DMZ versus the jungle. Yeah. The jungle fighting is a little bit different, and the ants on the jungle floor are not bad, and more leeches were terrible, and but that's a part of history. And they were standing down too, and they left shortly after I left in October of '71.
And what unit was that?
That was Company B, 3rd to 1st Infantry, 11th Brigade, Americal Division. And in fact, the previous year before I got there, there was a medic in that company, a battalion, that won the Medal of Honor in Vietnam, in the Winder Health Clinic in Fort Benning is named in his honor. And that was the same brigade that General Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell served in.
Okay. Well, describe your basic mission when you were in your second assignment, the assignment in the jungle.
Well, when I got there, it is interesting. I shouldn't really say this. I had a 3-day in-country transfer, and being 19 years old, now I grew up and I was 19 years old, and they gave me a 3-day in-country transfer. I got on a chopper and flew down to Da Nang, and had 2 or 3 days to hang around in the Air Force barracks, and got me a good shower and eat food and see how the rear people were living. I remember in the barracks there, somebody hollered incoming and started running around, and what happened was a mile down the road, somebody got a rocket, and they were all running around with the chickens cut off. I said, go on back to sleep. Incoming is when it lands on top of you, not a mile away. I thought that was pretty funny. And then when I walked in to report it to my unit there at Chu Lai, and I'll always remember this, and I tell people, the company had just come out of the field. They were standing down after being out in the field for about a month or so, and they were all drinking and partying and fighting when I walked into the company area at Chu Lai. And it was kind of, I said, oh, what have I got myself into now? Wow. But I think when you grunts and people that really go through a lot of serious stuff, they kind of vent or release their anger and frustration by drinking, having a good time. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know. I got all that out of my system, but back then, you could drink a couple of beers and still do your job. Yeah. But nowadays, the young generation, they drink a beer or two, they lose a week's work. I'm old school. Yeah. Nothing wrong with old school. God bless the old school way.
Yeah. Well, what was you just gave us one difference between your second assignment and your first. What were some other differences between your assignment in the jungle and your assignment on the DMZ?
Well, I think there was more supplies, and you had more access to fatigues and jungle fatigues and boots, and a little more recreational stuff to do.
Is that because they were closer to Saigon? Or?
Well, closer to Da Nang. But see, up on the DMZ, we had there was no places to really drink beer and relax when you're not working. There was no, there were just the people. The DMZ was the end of the line. There was nothing up there. It was constant combat on a daily basis. You didn't congregate in groups. You wouldn't go, there was no movie theaters or clubs and stuff. You know, if they had more, it was almost like stateside duty in South Vietnam compared to where there was literally nothing.
Yeah.
You had to make your own entertainment. You know, it was so bad for entertainment. We would sit there and shoot the bunkers. Charlie 2 and Contian had so many rats in there while we were eating sea rations. They would sit there and beg for food while we were eating our food. That's how bad it was. And we used to have for entertainment, just briefly, we call them kimchi cowboy bands. They would come up there and play. And as soon as 1 or 2 rounds of incoming would come in or something, they were ready to pack up and leave. But really, it was like being in prison. There's nothing, and you just had you had your friends you talked to, and you write letters, and just whatever little stuff you could scrounge up. If you have when you were not out in the field and in a bunker there, you had a little radio you could listen to, and that was about it. It was, nobody wanted to come see you. They come on a very short time. You know, it's one interesting thing that me and my fellow veterans, they had a Korean that used to run a barbershop on our fire base. And we always noticed on the days that he would not show up is the days we would get hit the most.
Really?
Yeah. And I've learned, and I think in time, my Sergeant Moore, the operations sergeant up there, he put an end to any Vietnamese coming on our fire bases, because they would come up there and work, but they were working during the daytime, and at nighttime they were out, taking a list. I remember one time when a movement, they were going out of Charlie 2, going up to Contian at night, and you move at night, in that area there you would use flares, to move if you're doing movement to a certain extent. And I remember one day, or one evening, they were going out and they had about 6 or 7 MVA in there in the wire.
Really?
Yeah. But one thing I like about where we were at, it was a free fire zone. You didn't have to ask to shoot at them. If you saw them, you shot them. And you didn't have to get on the radio to ask. You shot them. Yeah. And it's my biggest thing. Charlie 2 was a better place to stay at than Contian. Contian was just very nasty and dirty, and it was the pits. Yeah. And I remember one time right before Thanksgiving, I was on the bunker line, and they had a new person. They went out on patrol. You had a lot of minefields up there between Contian and Charlie 2, and somebody had taken a patrol inside the minefield, and everybody in there was killed. Oh, and they had a helicopter hovering over there trying to recover 1 or 2 people from that. So it was when new people come up there, you need to let them know the areas where to go and not to go, and to be aware.
Did they just not receive an adequate briefing, or?
There's a possibility. I think toward the end of the war that they just, people, some people were gung-ho and some people were not gung-ho. To me, real leadership is when after the first rounds go off and the dust settles, you're going to find out who's leading and who's not leading. Yeah. And but one thing about leadership is you got to learn to follow before you can lead. And up there it doesn't matter, what rank you are. There's a bullet for everybody. And but toward the end, I think the Americans were getting sloppy. There's a retrograde operations, and the lack of security was down. My security didn't go down, but I noticed other people's security. I just had till I got on that Freedom Bird flying out of Cameron Bay, I knew I was safe. Yeah. And but what's so sad about the Vietnam War, I was home for about 2 weeks and I wanted to go back. And a lot of people I don't know experienced.
Explain that for the record here.
When I came home, you didn't expect anybody to have parades or weapons, but I remember when I came home on December the 6th, 1971, my mother was cooking grits for me, and and she hugged me, and that's the only welcome home I got, you know. But talking about grits, during that period of time we had care packages when you're in the extreme locations where you didn't have any type of PXs or anything to go to, but they would mail us chocolate cookies and cakes, and there'd be a little bit of mildew on them and stuff, but it still tasted good, you know. And it was good, you know. Care packages you live by. The mail, and I know when the mail brought our mail up to Charlie too, they give it out real quick and get back to the rear as fast as they could.
Particularly in your second assignment, did you have any contact with local Vietnamese to speak of?
Yeah, I've learned there that the sergeants told me when we were out way up in the mountains, and you know, it was extreme jungle, having to walk, and he said when the little children would come up and sell you cokes, you'd be nice to them, because if you kind of rude to them and stuff, they discovered that the more rude you were to the little children, the more contact they would come. Okay. But the purpose of the children were coming up there to really look to see how many men you had, what your combat load was, and stuff like that. They had a purpose, and we knew that. And it was, they were still, I went on for about a month before I got sick. You know, lot of type of air assault missions. You know, it's landing in a hot LZ and everybody's shooting up and jumping out of that chopper, and you're stuck out in the middle of grass. You don't know where anybody else is at. It's a scary feeling.
And you participated in a number of those?
Oh yeah. And we went on meet. It was fun for the brief time it was. It was fun, and it was different. We did more. They would pick us. We would land in an area with a chopper and patrol the area for a couple hours. Then they'd come back and pick us up and lift us into another area. We'd go around. I had a platoon sergeant. He was from Hawaii. I always remember him. He was real gung ho. He didn't have long pants on. He had it cut off. He was an Hawaiian soldier, and he would just, you know, lead us and go through there, and it was fun. I went to one reunion with the Americal Division. They met here in Atlanta and met with them, but I don't seem to have the bond or connection with the people in the Americal Division that I do with the 5th Division people I serve with on the DMZ.
Do you go to reunions?
I go to reunions on a religious basis, and I wouldn't miss them for anything in the world. I've been going to them for about 10 years, and the purpose of our society is we try to find people. See, they located me. Somebody got a copy of my Bronze Star orders and have my Social Security number, and we locate people that way. And some veterans do not want to ever have anything to do with the military anymore. You know, they just say it was done. They just want to shut it out, and I respect them for that. And but we meet annually, and we try to preserve the history of what we've done, and it's fun going to meet people. And I'm still to this day looking for people and calling them up and trying to make contact with people.
I want to go back to something you said about when you came back, that your mother hugging you was pretty much the only welcome you got. Did you receive any abuse from individuals?
Oh yeah, my brothers and people that I went to high school with and close friends, they laughed and made fun of me. And in the current city that I live in now, they hate me because I'm a Vietnam veteran. You know, because I stand up, I fly the American flag and do the right thing. And there's some people in our society that they've been stereotyping, believing that Vietnam veterans are all wackos on drugs and go postal on everybody. And that's sad. That there are veterans that there are trouble, but it doesn't say that everybody's that way. And
we're particularly glad you're telling your story, because veterans telling their story is going to show that's not true.
Yeah, but I just don't think the Vietnam veteran has to apologize for what they did. In my opinion, that we didn't lose the Vietnam War, we actually won, because today Vietnam is a better place and a better country, and there's more people of freedom. If America was so bad, let me ask you this, why when we were withdrawing and leaving, why do so many people want to get on the boat or the plane to come to America?
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. Now, when you came back to the United States, did you leave the military?
I left the military. I got an early out when I was assigned to a hospital near Fort Gordon. They wanted to send me to Fort Bragg, and I elected not to. And I had a real good first sergeant there. He was a special forces medic named First Sergeant Collins. He said, "Sergeant," I had an office right next to him. He says, "Sergeant Owens," I said, "I know you've been through a lot." He said, "You just go out and drink a few beers and have a good time and relax and get all that." And he was very understanding, and you know, it's my own kind of welcome home type of thing.
Yeah.
And I had one guy that was with me. He lived in my hometown, and shortly after we both got out, he committed suicide. And it's always been very hard on me. And you know, I try to explain to young soldiers today, and back then, no matter, we go there and we do something, but don't come home and expect open arms anybody to do anything. See, as Vietnam veterans, we can talk to each other, understand each other, but trying to explain it to somebody that's never been there and just read what the college professors tell you and the news media tells you, they don't have a true perspective on what things is about.
In later years, after you got back from Vietnam, you went back into the military, didn't you?
I went back in the military. I went in, what got me back in the military is I do volunteer work at the USO with my veterans group, and I had a very blessed opportunity to go to Bagram, Afghanistan as a USO to help soldiers out. And my sense of what I learned in Vietnam is I want to go on the front lines where the Rangers, Special Forces, go out there and take them something. You need something. And just experience that brief period of time, I said, well, maybe I should get back in. And there was opportunity for me to get back in. And I did join the Army Reserves and went through the training at 55 years old. And I smoked the 20-year-olds. I still have it at 55. And during that period of time in the reserves, I did the Army 10-miler. I did the Ironman in Hawaii, which is a 140-mile event where you swim 2.5 miles, bicycle 112, and run 26 miles. I did the White Sands Battalion Death March, and then I went to Nijmegen and do a 150-mile road march in the Netherlands to honor the World War II veterans in the bridge too far, and it's a very moving event. And you walk in your uniform, and everybody's alongside the road is cheering you on and everything, and it's very fun.
Yeah, you should be proud of each one of those events.
Oh yeah. But in comparison to reserves today and when we were as Vietnam veterans, when we joined, you know, I got $300 a month, and I didn't join in the Army for the money and the perks and the benefits. I did it for the, you know, being a Boy Scout and being American and watching John Wayne movies. That's what I made a decision. I want to be a real man and not somebody with long hair and a hippie and not taking a bath. And it's just.
Describe your experience in Afghanistan. What you did and what you observed.
I enjoy the young soldiers there, seeing a Vietnam veteran there shaking their hand. It was awesome. And I got on the airplane and went through it. You know, they didn't question me. They looked like I knew what I was doing and knew my place, and it was fun. I enjoyed it, and I got a lot of good feedback and a lot of generals and colonels. And being the person I am, I know how to talk to a private as well as a general. You know, you always tell them the truth. A real leader he doesn't ask the staff officer what's going on. You always ask the E2s, the E3s, the people in the line, and they will tell you the truth.
That's right.
Yeah. And but there's a lot of good American young fighting men, Rangers, Special Forces, and stuff. They're doing an outstanding job in Afghanistan, and it kind of breaks my heart because I want to be there, right there with them. I would love to be in the trenches with them and help them out and share in their suffering and what they're doing. But I think today's military, or the type of reserve unit that I'm currently assigned to, is it's a sense of entitlement. They join and they're doing it for the big money. When I went to Vietnam, I got $300 a month and nowhere to spend it.
When you were in Afghanistan, what unit were you in?
I worked for the USO. I was at the Pat Tillman USO Center in Bagram. Okay. And when I flew there out of Qatar, I flew on a C-17 aircraft, and the pilot let me sit in the command seat the whole flight. And as we were flying into Bagram, you had a wave like this and that before you land, because they thought potential rocket attacks and stuff. And it was a fun thing. I just, the USO is a wonderful organization, and they do a lot for the soldiers. And but it just, I'm very blessed and very fortunate to be able to go to the USO and sit. There's a lot of Vietnam veterans that didn't have that opportunity to be a part of that, and I'm very thankful for the people that allowed me to do that.
Well, you're a very patriotic American, and you've served your country not just in Vietnam, but going to Afghanistan and working at the USO. And I want to tell you how much we appreciate what you've done. Yeah. And I want to be sure you have an opportunity to say anything else you want to say before we conclude the interview, for the future generations that will watch this, and family members who will watch it, and just like to hear anything else you'd like to say about your experiences in Vietnam, or anything else about your life.
Yeah, I want to particularly thank my cousin Jane and my other cousin named Anna Marie for supporting me and believing in me for all the hardships. I'm thankful for the people that know that I've suffered a lot of personal and physical hardships in my life, and the people believed in me, even though when a lot of people didn't believe in me, and that's what counts. I'm very grateful for my friends in the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association that supported me and believed in me. I'm very grateful for the people assigned to the 5th Division, my other fellow Vietnam veterans. We meet once a year. In fact, I call them up on a regular basis all over the country, and we talk to each other. We're our own support group. And it's a pleasure to go once a year to meet and be with them. And I'm just thankful in a lot of ways that I was able to stand up and do something. When you gotta do what you gotta do. And if I had to do it over again, I would do it. No regrets. And you got to be a survivor. And that's what it all.
Well, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming in here and sharing your story, and even more than that, how much we appreciate your service to our country.
Yeah.
And all I can do is thank you on behalf of all of us for what you've done for your country.
Thank you. Glad to be here.